Hi there, this is Dr. Buddy. Let's take a look at Project 6. Now, a couple things to notice is that there are two parts to it, a Part A and a Part B. What we have is we have a file, and I think I have a copy of that file, and maybe not. There it is. And this file has characteristics. It has, so it's named, so the name is measles.txt. It's got a country, so here we can see over here, you start with a country which is 50 characters wide. You've got an income level, 6 characters wide. You have percent vaccinated, 3 characters wide. You have a region, 25 characters wide, and a year, 4 characters wide. Now, because this is done in terms of numbers of characters, you're going to want to do slicing. That's your friend in this assignment. You know, that is, so if we have if I store that into a line, then I'm going to want to say, oh, you know, the country goes from 0 up to 50 or something like that. And you're, you know, it's okay, so where, you know, what's the year at, and so on. That'll be, you know, like line, you know, you have to play around with it, but, you know, I don't know, it's like 85 to the end or something like that. And one of the first things that you want to do is to take one of these lines and slice it up and make sure that you can get things that we want out of here. We're actually going to be dealing with income level, percent vaccinated, and the year in terms of things that we're going to operate on, and then we're going to print whole lines. The income level, that's the code is here, and so that's just what they mean. Like you know, if we look over here, WBLI, so those are low income. Those are rates for low income. So in Afghanistan, among low income people, the vaccination rate was 22% in 1989. That's the kind of thing that we're getting, and this is real data, right? I mean, you know, we went to the World Health Organization and downloaded this file. We actually cleaned it up a little bit for you, just to make it easier to read, and we'll deal with messier files later on. So, and you know, there's a couple of things that are worth noting. One is that you don't get to use lists in this assignment. So what are we doing in the first part? The first part of the program says that we're going to read the file measles.txt, and we're going to write that information out. And so that we're going to read a file, write a file, and then we're going to read particular things in the file. So we're going to need an output file, and there's some error checking there, which we can leave to the end. And then I have to do, you know, so I'm going to prompt for a year, and so for example, if I enter a 198, that's going to match up with 1987 because the 198 part matches up. And again, slicing is your friend here because we're doing a comparison of something that's 3 long, and I want to be looking at a slice of that's the same length, and then I can do an equality comparison of that. So if I specify a 19, then I have something I'm comparing that is of length 2, and so I'm going to be looking at a slice of size 2, and I'll compare those. So again, slicing is your friend here. You're going to slice to get the year, and then when we do this comparison, I found it handy to do slicing. How big is your slice? Well, you know how long your slice is because you know how long the input is. And then there's also, if it's empty or lowercase or uppercase all, then that'll also give you all the values. So let's take a quick look at that. And over here, I have a program. And what does it do? So it opens the file, and I could have had in here, I could have had a comma with the R character, but that's the default value. So I left it out here. You can do it either way. If you feel more comfortable putting the R in there, that's fine. So that opens the file, and this gives us, we name the, where we've put some storage space in memory, a buffer, and now we can iterate through that using the for. So we're going to go through this thing one line at a time. I'm going to print the line, and then I'm going to close the file. And let's take a look at this. All right, let's run this. And this thing will go forever. There's 6,000 lines. I'm not going to let it go all 6,000 lines. And I used the Control-C to stop that. But all I did is I read a line and printed a line, read a line, printed a line. Just went through the whole file. And again, you can see, it's got the same kind of format that we saw above. What I like to do when I'm dealing with a 6,000 line file is I like to look just at part of that. So what I do is I put a counter in, and counters start at 0, and I say if the count, I don't know, is greater than 10, then I'll break out of my loop, and of course we have to remember to increment my counter. So now when I run this, it will just do the, print the first 10 lines. Okay, and if I wanted to see 20 lines, I could just change my 10 to 20, and away we go. And now I'm just going to be looking at the first 20 lines in there. And that gives me a little bit more information to look at. In fact, it even gets me up to years of 2000, so I'll be able to test that kind of thing. All right, so now I can read a file. What's the other thing we want to do? Well, we want to be able to write to a file. So I'll call it my out file, and I'll call it test.txt. And in this case, I do have to indicate that we're going to write to the file. And you need to do some testing. In fact, if you look in the chapter on files, which is 5 if I remember correctly, there's a poker example in there. And if you look at part 1 of that, that has a little loop with an except in it. And you can just copy and paste that. You probably want to change some of the names of the variables, but you just copy and paste that right in here, and that will let you check. Actually, that one is checking for reading a file, for opening it, for reading, as opposed to writing, but it's a small modification. So definitely go get that. So now I have this. So instead of printing a line, if we look at print in the shell, you see that there is an option here called the file equals something, right? And the standard, the default one is to send it to standard output, which is your screen. So what I'm going to do is instead of just printing the line to the default screen, let's print it to the file whose name is out file. Right, that's the name that we gave it. And so we'll do the same thing. And what happens with the write is that if that file doesn't exist, it creates it. And so now when I run this in the shell, we don't see anything happening. I can actually go and let's see, what did we call it? We called it test.txt. So let's go grab my my directory here, and there's a test.txt, and it comes up and there's nothing in it. So why is there nothing in it? There's nothing in it because I forgot an important step. So let's go fix that. What did I forget to do? I forgot to close it. So what happened was that everything I wrote was written into RAM and was never actually saved out onto the disk. So the file was created, but because I didn't close, what happens when you close is it copies it out of RAM onto the disk, and now it's really in the file. So we'll do this thing again. Now when I look at this file, I actually see that it has stuff in it. Font's a little small there, oops, but we can see that it has the same kind of stuff in there. Let me blow this up a little bit. There you go. And so we've written, and again, I just wrote 20 lines in there, and we see that it's the same 20 lines that were displayed on the screen. So that's how you can write. There is a thing that there is an option if I want to open a file, try to open the file, and I'll call it dummy.txt, and there's an X option. And what that does is, if the file doesn't exist, we can see now, if I go into my my file viewer here, we can see I now just created a dummy.txt file. But now look what happens if I try it again. So now the file exists and an error comes out. And so if the file exists, then this error is created. A file exists error. That's a nice little name. And you're going to want to use that, because if that file does exist, then the program will prompt the user to determine if the program should succeed. So you're going to want to do a try, and then to open the file, open some file in quotes with an X, and the exception that you're going to try to catch is this guy. File exists error. And then in that suite underneath, that's where you're going to prompt to ask the user, okay, the file exists. Whenever you open it for writing, you overwrite it. So you're going to prompt and say, hey, do you really want to overwrite that? And if they do, then you can open it with the name that you want, presumably the same name, and open it for writing. And opening it for writing will overwrite it. So we've taken care now of all parts of that. Let me show you how this actually runs. So here's part A. And what I did is, I actually, as soon as I figured out that, as soon as I got it working to write to a file, when I wanted to test out the inputting of a year, and I still have, it's only going to print out 10 or 20 of these. So it's reading the measles file, and it inputs all the things with 1981. Not very interesting, because in my 10 or 20 lines that I have there, oops, there we go. All right, so now if I print 198, all right, a partial year, now it will give me all the years that start with a 1, a 9, and an 8. And what I did is I did a slice. I looked at the 198. I said it was 3 long. I sliced off the first 3 of this, and then I did a comparison. If they were the same, I printed them. And right now I'm printing them to the display. To print them to the file, I just change the I just changed this. So I left this out so I could print to the display and test this out a little faster. And then I believe there's one that starts with the number 2. So let's fire this thing up. Start with the number 2. Yeah. So there was one that was the year 2000 in the first 20 lines that I had. So that's part A. Totally separate problem for part B. There's some stuff you can copy across, but what does part B look like? All right, so part B, again, it reads the measles file, except that this time you actually prompt for it, and then we and then we have some questions about it. So we're not writing to a file in this time. We're just writing to the screen. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to input 2 values. We're going to input a year and then we're going to input numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, which correspond to low income, upper income, and so on. That is, they correspond to, if we scroll back, you know, the 1 will be that, the 2 will be that, the 3 will be that, and the 4 will be that. So rather than asking you to input WBL1, we're asking you to input a 1, and then you convert that to a WBL1. And in fact, that's a nice time to write a function. You know, write a function that does that. So, you know, what does a function do? It takes in an int, and it returns a string that we can then search on. Beautiful time. Because remember, part of this you'd like to be practicing with functions. And let's see. So what else do we have to do here? Where are we here? Okay. And so then, so the first thing we have to do is just ask for, you know, so what I did is I first wrote a program that would ask for a file name, and so I give it the measles.txt, and then I input a year, 1981, and then it will just print out all the 1981s. All right, now we actually want the year and the income, but I started out with this year, and again, I'm just printing out, you know, whatever this is. Is this 2, 4, 6, 8, 10? You know, I'm printing out a dozen values here. So I'm not going through the whole file. I still have my count in there because I don't want to look at, you know, 1,000 of these or something like that. All right. And then, you know, so once I got the year going, then you know, and so what is it doing? It's basically doing, you know, this part of it is exactly like the other part from part A, except that it's simpler. It looks for the whole year. It doesn't look for parts of the year. It just looks for the whole year. So that part's almost exactly the same. And then I brought in, I wrote that little function that converts a number. So if I say, all right, let's look at the 1981s, and let's look at income level 2. All right. And so now this selects out of that, you know, out of my list, and now it only has the ones that are 1981 and WB, you know, the lower middle income people, because that's what corresponded to the number 2. And again, I print out, you know, whatever this is. I print out a dozen values as opposed to whatever thousands of things might match that. Again, for testing purposes. And all I did is, you know, to do these is if I look at my basic program, and on this one I'm well, let's actually go fix it up. So I'm not doing output, so I don't need I don't need my output file, but instead of just automatically printing a line, I'll say if year equals the year input, then I will print the line. And now, in order to get the income limit, I'll say, and so not only does the year match, but the income matches whatever the income code is that got input, something like that. And then I print the line. But I'm only printing 20 of these. All right, so it's you know, do this in pieces. Right, do it a little bit at a time. Then we have to find, you know, out of these ones. So in this case, I've printed a dozen things here that have this limit. What's the average of the percentages? So you're really looking at what's the average of this column. And what do you need to do to the average? Well, you got to have a total, and you got to have to count how many of them there are. Okay. So I got to start my total at 0. I got to start my count at 0. Watch out! I already used count, so maybe I had better have. I'll call it the data count. Right? Start them both at 0 before my loop, and then as I go through, every time I print it, add to the total, add to the count, and at the end, how do you find the average? You take the total and divide by the count. All right. Pretty straightforward thing to do. So again, I don't write the whole piece of code, I just write that part, and when I run that, now ask for my file, I input a year, and do an income level, same ones that I have there, and at the end it will print the average. And in fact, while I'm testing this, I did my, I printed out the total, the data count, and the average. So I got a total of 264 data count. So I'm printing out a dozen things here, and that's what the average was. And I can very quickly, with a calculator, I can add those up to see that in fact it is 264. I can count them and see that it's 12, and I can do the division and see that it actually comes out to be 22. Now it turns out mathematically it doesn't make sense to average percentages unless they're all percentages of the same total, but we're just trying to make this assignment a little easier, so we're not going to do the proper weighted average of that. And then the next one we want to do is find the minimum. Okay, and in the project we actually gave you a hint about how do you find the minimum. It says, this says to do the maximum. So if we're going to look for the maximum, we start out and hold on, there we go. We start out with a current maximum, something smaller in all values. So what's the smallest thing that I can have as a percent? The smallest thing, well, the smallest percent can be 0, so we can make this like -1 or -10 or something like that. And then as we go through, if I ever find a bigger value than that, so let me call this max value. Max value equals -1, let's say. And so then I'll say, oh, if my current value is bigger than my max, then what do I do? Oh, now I have a new max. I have a new max value equals something. All right. But not only do we want to save that, but we also want to be able to print out the line that it's on. So not only do I need a max value, but I have to have a max line, and I gotta save the new one of that as I go along. All right, and so that's the next thing to do, and that's how you do max. Well, we'll leave it to you to figure out to do min, but it's almost exactly the same, very small difference. And so now when you put that into your code and you run it, and again, I'm leaving out a lot of testing at this point, income level of 2. So now, not only do I go along and I get the, in this case, I was just doing the minimum one, and let me just make my window just a little bit bigger here. There it is. All right, so I printed out my average just like I did before, and then I also found the minimum one and I printed out that line. Now, of course, you notice that there's more than one that has a 0, so to make things easier, let's just print out the first one. You save the first one, not the last one or one of the ones in the middle, but just grab the first one. All right. And you do the same thing with max. Of course, you got to format it, and there's some error checking to be done, but that's the basis of this assignment.